So can you call roll, please? Here.
Strick,
Here.
Giacomo, Ferraro, Gerber, Morris.
Thank you so much. I just want to make an announcement that an executive session was held on May 25th, 2023 and June 5th, 2023 to discuss legal and personnel issues with the solicitor. Council, is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda? Can we make a motion for tonight's agenda first? Oop.
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Any council discussion?
Now I'd like to make a motion.
Is there a second for that? All in favor of the amendment as proposed by Council Member Zavala? Aye. Any other council discussion? All in favor of the amended agenda, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Amended. So with that said, tonight's only action item will be the presentation on fire and EMS. However, since we did have a full agenda, if there is anyone in the public who would like to speak on any items originally on the agenda or anything in general, you can utilize that time now. We will have a separate Q&A/public comment after the presentation tonight. So if there's any other public comment not related to fire and EMS, please speak now. You have 3 minutes to complete your comments. All right. Oh.
Charlotte Watson, 523 Magnolia Street in Kennedy Square, Pennsylvania. The last meeting we've had looked like a dog and pony show. It's the only way I can say it. Can you hear me? That's unusual.
I see the green. The mic is yours.
Okay. The last meeting, can you hear me now? Somebody help me here, because I don't deal with electronics. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to break it.
Just have to move closer to it.
I'm close enough. We should be able to pick it up. This supposed to be new technology. No, it don't sound like it's on.
See if you talk into it. Can you hear me back there? Okay.
Thank you, Rach.
The last meeting that we had here looked like a dog and pony show. It's the only way to say it. Can you hear now? Because I want you to hear it. Okay. We saw we saw people asking for an exception at a borough council meeting that I think should have been at the zoning board. The zoning board is an entity of the Pennsylvania state government. It's a protection for the citizens, and that's why it's there. It's there to protect us from anybody coming here as a vulture, and it's to protect us from anybody on this side of the table not doing right. It's a legal entity. When its decision is made, it's sealed in stone. And I didn't see that happen. And I'm very disappointed that you people who are elected officials don't have enough wherewithal to have picked that up. That's what the zoning board is. It protects us totally. And you left us out there. The other thing is, we pay a lot of taxes and you even raised them. And there's a lot of services we're not even getting. We don't even get a bulletin so everybody can germanely move behaviorally within this environment. So we got dogs everywhere, crapping everywhere. We got people bringing dogs uptown and that wasn't supposed to be allowed. We also had to take trash for a spring or fall cleanup down to South Street, and we pay too much taxes to be carrying it on our backs 3 miles to get rid of it. We're supposed to have those dumpsters in certain areas, and they should have been there. The citizens are paying you too much, and everything we're seeing here is going to private entities. They say there's $400,000 for the street crew. They should be working now or they're going to miss their timetable. First, they said 200 and some right here. Oh, no, there's 4. And then the numbers were had so much fluidity for the liquid fuels. I didn't mean to make a pun, but that's what it is. Because those men should be down there now with their shovels, with their gravel. They should be working on those streets. It is June. The window of opportunity is here. Then I'm tired of the false narratives that I'm reading on the internet. There's not 1,800 nothing here asking for NBF to be built on. That's a perfect lie. A perfect lie. If you didn't think I knew how to get on the internet, you're crazy. If you didn't think I know how to pick up on things, you're crazy. It's not only by phone calls. So I got on that internet that I so despise. So I read a lot about what the stuff you're putting out there. There's not 800 anybody been polled in the citizens in Kennett Square. That's something somebody wants in this town. And they're trying to push that false narrative until it becomes a reality. Now I'm gonna get back to the library. Library can do what it wants, but you're gonna take it off our tax bill. We already paid for it. We already paid for the library in our taxes. And that multi-million-dollar monster they built, they're gonna have to figure out how to keep the upkeep on it, because we can't. We can't. We're 1 square mile. We can't do that. We're built on the back of laborers, blue collar. We can't take that. You better get it straight and start figuring it out and start thinking for yourself instead of thinking where somebody else is telling you to think. Because I can see that. It's very clear. I was proud of you girls last meeting, very proud of you. You took a stand where a stand was needed. As to those parking spaces, so I can be rude, those parking spaces say on a surveyor's map from 1961, leased to the Borough of Kennett Square. I know somebody said on the internet, somebody said they got the roadmaster, and he said, roadmaster being the borough streets, whatever it's called, that he said every 10-year lease. That's a lie. That's a lie. And I want y'all to look at me. My dad was the roadmaster for 15 years, way before radar was even born. 15 years, my father was the roadmaster right here in Kennett Square. Dug the dirt, put the tire and pitch in. Could only see his head above in a hole while his men stood around. He instructed them. When it was a brand new building down there in the Kennett Park. So if you think you're going to be one up from me, you're not going to be one up from me. And I'm going to tell you something else by law, and your lawyer's going to listen to this very carefully. We have notoriously constructed, maintained, and operated that parking lot for over 21 years by state government regulation. It's ours. So you better get it straight. When you start coming back up here and try to twist the narrative, you better twist it right. And I'm gonna tell you another thing. You better start knowing who I am. I want you to know who I am, because it goes past Kennett Square. If you call Harry Lewis in Coatesville, he's going to tell you who I am.
Thank you, Ms.
If you're
Watson.
going to call Frida Maddox over in the county office, she's going to know who I am. Several of the judges, bailiffs, guards, they're going to know who I am, and they're going to know I stand to be forthright at all times. And no matter what happens in my life, those people that come before me, I hold them to the same standard. So I'm going to hold you to a higher one that I don't see coming. It's time you start waking up and smell the coffee. You represent citizens in Kennett Square. You don't represent these private entities. It's out of control. And these agendas are too long, because that's to push them through quick as long as you're in those seats, and we won't be able to say nothing. I want to see some honesty coming out of here and some of you people standing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Another public comment. John?
Thomas 406 South Broad Street. I wasn't going to talk tonight for a change. until Charlotte spoke about the zoning. I am, I think, substitute on the zoning hearing board. Yes, ma'am. A while back on State Street, there was a little lot that went to zoning, and I was there that night. And we voted against that zoning because of the hill, steep hill. So recently I went by and the guy's building on it, and I'm thinking, what's this? Went to zoning hearing board, I voted against it, we all voted against it, and what's he building on? Then I hear that the lawyer for the zoning hearing board wrote that something, and I haven't seen it yet, and I demand to see it from now on, if I vote on anything, that he was trying to build too much on it. What we voted against was he couldn't build on that hill. I walked that hill 10 times before I voted against it. Now he comes back, gets an appeal, and now the guy that owns the ice cream place is building a house on it. Why have a zoning hearing board if you're just going to change it all the time? So 2 weeks ago, I get a phone call. We want you to come in the next zoning hearing board. Why? I don't know. I got a packet, and it was that guy with a distillery. So I go. They don't know who I'm at. They ain't saying nothing. I got the packet. I know exactly what's going on. And I don't like it. I'm not sure that I was understanding what the guy was trying to do. And he did not answer any questions. He talked a lot. He told us a lot of things that could be done, but he didn't answer any questions. And then the lawyer for the borough again stopped and asked any representatives from the borough. Ms. Kokomo said she was there representing the borough, not herself. He asked her opinion before they voted. That's against the law. You're not supposed to interfere with the zoning hearing board. So this guy either don't know what he's doing, this lawyer, or something's happening because he ought to be fired. Now I'm getting ready, and I'm getting ready to go on the 27th. I'm getting ready to go again. And if you don't want me to be honest and fair, then kick me the hell off of it, because I'm not going to play this game where I make a decision and I give you a valid reason, and then you turn around and change it. Somebody in here changes it. Now that's just, you know, I was there, I listened, I read everything. I've read the municipal planning code so many times that I know it. I'm verifying it again. I keep doing this stuff and it doesn't matter. Zoning hearing board is a separate entity altogether. You're not supposed to interfere at all. And I'll tell you how I first learned about that when I was on council 20-some years ago. First thing, borough lawyer pulled me in the room with the borough president, borough vice president, and told me how to cheat and get around it. I said, you want me to break the law? And we didn't get along from then on because I wouldn't cheat. But that was the first thing that I was told, how to do the wink theory on zoning here, if you want something. Now, if you want to be, and he said, you guys are a part of it all the time, and you're not a part of it. That's what he said. I'm quoting the lawyer, and he seems to be running it. I thought the zoning hearing board runs it, and he's supposed to advise. And he's not going to run me. So on the 27th, if you don't want me to give my opinion, get me the hell off of it, because I'm going to give my opinion. It's going to be a right opinion and a legal opinion. And if you change it again, or if we go against, then we're going to play hell.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Hi, Margaret Opplinger, 251 North Broad Street. First of all, I want to thank the flash because I didn't notice the noise on North Broad Street like we did before. That's number one. Number two, I want to congratulate the police force with how many tickets they give. It's like wonderful. I mean, I read that and I'm like, are you kidding? Good job. What I want to say is I was very disappointed in the easement grant. for the library. I think the furniture guy told us that, you know, he would be able to, he would use the parking for his trucks before and after hours. I didn't see a point, but you gave that away. Okay. The other thing I want to say is, I looked at the attachments to the agenda for this evening, and the only thing I'm not good with architectural things, you know, to read plans and all that kind of stuff. But I did read the one that I guess Bontrager's building next to the Mexican food place on Union Street. I don't see where the parking is for that. 7 units. So I have a concern about parking. I mean, we're always talking about parking. I don't know where the parking is for that building. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Opplinger, and thank you for the feedback on the Flash concerts. That's helpful. Any other public comment? There being none, we'll move to the reports. I do not have a report tonight. Kyle, Borough Manager's report.
Just thank you to Kennet Collaborative, Taylor Oil, and our other partners for a really good Memorial Day parade. And just as a heads up, we are going to be announcing road bids for repaving at the July meeting. We're waiting on a grant from the county. Hear back on that in June. That's it.
Anything from the solicitor's office, Mr. Gerber? Chief, Police Department? Can a fire company? All right. Thank you, Chief. Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance Committee met on May 18th. Open public session. We reviewed the bills. It'll be presented tonight and had any of our questions answered satisfactorily. And the largest portion of the discussion was around the capital improvement plan for 23 and 24, kind of reviewing on a line item basis what we had budgeted for this year and the status of those items and whether they'll happen this year or not. Overall, we're in good shape, or we believe the capital that we plan to spend this year in terms of roads and so forth around town will happen. Some things will slide into next year, but we'll move some things up to this year as well. So overall, pretty good shape. With that, our revenue and expenses are right about on target with 33% of the year done through the April numbers that we had at the time. We're at 39% of the revenue, so just slightly up of where we should be, but overall good on expenses. And our next meeting is June 15th. All are welcome to come.
Any questions for Mr. Norris? Regina. Right.
We haven't posted most of the meeting minutes. We just started posting the finance committee meeting minutes.
Okay, I think that's important. Human Relations? Personnel Committee, Kyle's review is completely done finally, so thank you for everyone who participated. It did take a little while. I can't believe that we're at the point at the end of this year where we'll come up on contract negotiations. And so with that said, we will be doing a review before the end of the year as well. So everyone just ask for feedback or share thoughts with Kyle up in between now and then. Isn't anyone else? All right. And that's the end of the report. So we are going to move on to our fire and EMS study. And Kyle, are you going to kick this off?
Sure. Thank you, President Durfler. Thank you to everyone who came out tonight. As an introduction, the borough is part of the Kennet Area Regional Fire and EMS Commission with a few other municipalities. This commission works at the Kennett, Longwood, and Pomar Lynn fire companies. Service has improved since the borough joined about 5 years ago, but we are seeing an increase in costs. So we started about 250,000. We're at around 500,000 now, and there's a potential for it to again double or increase significantly. So each year we come up on a decision point, July 1, where each municipality has to decide if they want to elect to leave the regional commission or stay in it. So about 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, we were really at a decision point, and we decided to go out and bring in an expert consultant, an expert in fire and EMS to give us advice. This is a lot of money, but it's an important service. Are we right? Are we wrong? Give us some guidance on where we're at. So we interviewed a few firms. We found a couple that were really qualified to do it, including Fitch, who's here tonight. And candidly, we chose them because of the qualified firms. They were the cheapest. After they were contracted, the mayor let us know that he had worked with someone from the firm before, so we took them off the project. Over the last 2 months or so, Todd and his team have worked through our system. They've evaluated it. Of note, they've done a study. So this is not an audit. This is a study of our specific role in this and what our spending is. And looking ahead here, myself and the elected officials up here saw a draft of the presentation about a week ago, but no one has seen the full presentation other than Fitch, out of a desire so that everyone sees it at the same time. There's no kind of inside track to seeing it. To be clear, this is not a review of any one individual. So no review of employment contracts or hiring practices or internal management. No, this is a review of the borough's spending, commission operations as they relate to borough spending, and options for the borough moving forward. So in the spirit of cooperation, I'm hopeful that we can all avoid personal attacks and mudslinging and focus on what the presentation is, which is how do we provide really high quality service at a price that we can afford and commit to for the next couple of years. And then lastly, just before we get started here, I want to thank everyone for coming out. It's very rare that we run out of chairs, so I appreciate that. I'd like to thank our fellow regional commission members for being here. And I'd also like to thank Chief McCarthy in the back, who gave input throughout this process, so we appreciate that. And if it's okay with everyone, I'll turn it over to Todd.
Thank you, Council. Think we're up. Give me 1 second here. Let's go ahead and use the mic because I like to talk and walk. So, and I see that we have the presentation on the screen, so you can go ahead and forward. Thank you so much. So, Council, I want to thank you all for picking us. Thank you and letting us know that we were the cheapest. I will rearrange that from now on. I really appreciate that. Okay, now that I got that out of the way, I needed to go there. All right. No, we appreciate you all choosing us and letting us help you and work through this process. A process like this typically takes quite a few months. We normally see 4 to 6 months. Knowing you all were up against a time frame, we really wanted to work hard with you to hit that 6 month time or 6 week time frame to help give you some guidance as we were walking through. So we want to thank you for that. It was a lot of hard work. Also from the fire chief, we got a lot of information from him, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. As the borough manager explained, we conducted this objective review. Our goal with this review was to look at this from an operational perspective, but also look at it from a governance and oversight and understanding what the financial impact was. Because the goal was to determine whether or not, or provide options for you to decide if you want to stay within the commission or not. Part of our goal in putting this together was to provide not only that feedback to you, but also to help you to determine if you were to stay in or if you were to move on, what type of system of controls you would need in place as you move forward. When we talk about system of controls, we talk about governance. When we talk about governance, we talk about what governance really means. It's really putting in place controls and oversight, helping with risk management, and being financially sustainable. Those are really the three parts of governance that we talk about. Our presentation is really about that governance and making sure that the other pieces of that governance are in place for you as you move forward with either the municipal or the intermunicipal agreement or moving to other options. Next slide, please. When we kicked off our process was, as we mentioned, was very quick. 6 weeks, we hit the ground. To do that, though, we had to have a lot of cooperation. Our firm came in and asked for a bunch of information. Immediately after our kickoff meeting with the borough, we then reached out and asked for a 150-point information data request. We call it our IDR. Our information data request not only asked for information from the borough, asked information from the fire commission, asked information from the local fire department, also asked information for the CAD dispatch center from Chester County. We received pretty much, I'll call it about 98% of all that information provided back to us. In that expedient amount of time, we were provided not only our information data requests, intermunicipal agreements, bylaws, but we got what started and kicked off this entire commission, which was the VFIS study back in 2016. We received a fleet study, various budgeting documents. We did not receive the whole documents. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We received Longwood documents and we received Kennett Fire Company, but not really all the documents for the commission or the third fire service, Pro Marlin. Almost, you'll find out I have to get tongue tied when I say that. But in essence, as we started to walk through this together, we believe we got enough information working with not only the borough, working with the county, working with the fire chief to get a good understanding what we needed to move forward within the study. Next slide. As a council, though, we really broke down into 3 reasons why this study kicked off for you. And we bucketed them into these three various reasons. One of those reasons is just a short period of time ago, you increased taxes about 50%, if not 50%. That was a huge jump, right? As a borough, as we heard 1 square mile, I heard that just a minute ago, that's a large jump for a community of your size. On top of that, you're a part of this commission, and we'll talk a little bit about more the governance and the intermunicipal agreement, but you're part of a commission that the commencement time, the time that you entered this commission has really ran out, and the funding that had some controls in place are now no longer in place. And with that, year over year right now, you're projecting about a 30% increase. And we'll show you that financial impact later. Last but not least, with that intermunicipal agreement that you have, what we would typically see, and some of the things that we've heard, is the controls that should be in place or certain clauses that should have been into effect were never enacted by the commission, leaving an inequitable setup for you all specifically within the agreement. Now, when we start talking about that inequity, please go back to the last slide, please. As we talk about that inequity, equity and partnership is really what we're talking about. You're in with 6 other municipalities. Being within 6 other municipalities, you don't want one municipality, 2 or 3, to just be continually negatively affected. That's not what a partnership is. When we talk about that, partnerships should not negatively affect one and should be good for the many. If you start looking back at the VFIS study, that study was enacted and said this would be something that would improve service and be better financially for the community. I'm summarizing about 100 pages there. That to be said, that should be true. And in a system that has the proper controls in place and proper governance, that would allow for an equitable setup for all communities involved. Next slide, please. Now, we're going to start with the end and work backwards. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and give the recommendations right at the beginning. The ultimate issue that we see here is that the oversight of the commission is not in place properly. Okay, and I'm gonna say that the oversight of the commission is not in place properly, and the rapid increasing of the funds that the commission will have to invest is pushing the borough to where the commission may not be feasible for the borough long-term. That's really the ultimate issue here. The controls in place and the financial viability. That's where governance comes in, right? That's where we talked about it earlier. Controls and oversight, risk management, and financial responsibility. Our recommendations, we bucket them really into two. We looked at three, and we'll talk about those three in a minute, but we've really bucketed into two recommendations. Option one, continue to work with the commission but ensure that there's correct oversight in place. And what we mean by ensuring correct oversights in place is an administrator is put in place for accountability. All budgets are transparent and require approval by the commission. The budget approval requires a unanimous vote for equity. A risk assessment and a standards of cover assessment is completed to ensure proper resourcing and staffing. Actively work to obtain grants and improve fundraising efforts for cost savings. Audited financials should be completed by one firm for all agencies and presented to the commission annually, and allow flexibility for the municipality to adjust staffing to ensure shared and certified employees are able to help operate within the commission. These, we believe, are proper controls that either are currently within the intermunicipal agreement that have not been acted upon, or we believe should be put in the intermunicipal agreement for proper controls to be put in place. Option B, and this is really after if option one is unable to be enacted, and that's commit staffing and or financial support to Kennett Fire Company. If that were to be the case, and that was to be put in place and option B was to be utilized, then really keeping similar controls as we mentioned in option one, because again, you're putting funding into something, taxpayer funding, there needs to be proper controls in place. Ultimately though, no matter, if you choose option A or B, this is ultimately a policy decision. This again, as we say, comes back to governance, and ultimately coming down to a decision by the borough is a policy choice. Next slide, please. Now we talk about some of our preliminary findings. Our preliminary findings are just that. These are some of our biggest items. Ma'am, next slide, please. Is it freezing on you? I'll give it a pause for a second. I'll get a drink of water.
Looking at the screen itself.
How'd you get it faster than I could get my drink of water? Wet the whistle real quick. One too many. See if we can go back one. All right, perfect. All right, some of our preliminary findings. As I mentioned earlier, the intermunicipal agreement that's in place, there are limited controls that are in place for the commission while the municipalities are held for any financial deficit. What we heard from is that each one of the fire companies kind of set their own budget. The fire chief manages to the budget. There's been no administrator put in place to control the budgeting and the spending, and any overspending ends up coming back to the commission to fund those overages or to fund the growth into the future. We'll talk a little more about that, but those limited controls and not having an administrator in place hinders the idea of ensuring the proper management of the intermunicipal agreement and or the management services is in place. I kind of skipped ahead there, but the commission has not appointed an administrator. An administrator is there as a safety net to ensure that the right hand and the left hand are operating appropriately based on your agreement. Now, the commission, the regional commission has voted not to put that person in place. that we believe that person needs to be in place. That is your checks and balances. That is your management person for you as part of the commission. Those are controls that we would typically see, and somebody that internally is going to help with all the finances to make sure that everything is line itemed out, everything is purchased appropriately, and if somebody's deviating, somebody can throw the flag on the field. That person should be in place. Now, during the study, we did work with the Kennett. We did get audited financials from Longwood and Kennett's boroughs. However, or Longwood and Kennett Fire Company. However, we did not receive, because of the study, we did not receive the third fire company's audited financials, and we did not receive the commission's audited financials. So we were a little limited, and we'll talk a little bit more about our financial modeling later that had limitations to it. But a couple parts that we see. One, of course, you're using taxpayer dollars, there should be audited financials. Out of those audited financials, we noticed the ones that were provided to us, each one was done by a different financial auditing firm. They were not all done by the same audited firm. Challenge with that is, let's say something happens in one, something happens in another company, something happens in another company, and so let's say the commission, nobody has a global picture. Because there's no global picture in place, funds could potentially be moved, things couldn't be tracked, things may happen that would not be picked up if you had a full audit. All those audits should be not only done annually, but should be presented to the commission annually as well. Now, those are three big ticket items. One of the items we found as a positive note, we felt the calculation of the financial distribution that was put into the initial agreement for the intermunicipal agencies, how that's being divvied up, is really done in an objective manner. That's what we typically see as a firm. And we believe that is a good thing, because that methodology will help ensure equity and how much you're spending versus any of the other 5 partners that are with you. We do see some different methodologies, but the reality is this is an objective standard, something you can stand on, we believe is a good thing. Last bit, we got another slide of this, but one of the other pieces, you are the anomaly. Out of the 6 groups, or 6 boroughs and townships that are part of this commission, you are the anomaly. Your finances are in a much different position, we heard, compared to some of your neighbors. Because of that, and because of the voting that left, and we'll talk a little bit more about this commencement risk, or commencement period. Once that occurred, and it went from a unanimous vote and to the bylaws of a majority vote, your equity, the equity, or what kept as an equity position for everyone, is no longer there. It no longer ensured everyone was going to be put in an equitable fashion. One of the other pieces we saw when we looked at the fire study, or the fleet study, fire apparatus and ambulance costs are going up. They are escalating. They're escalating year over year, and some of them, they've gone up by 100% this past year, and they're hard to get. What used to take 6 months is now taking 2 years. We do believe the fleet study was extremely comprehensive. We actually thought it was a really good study. A couple challenges we felt with the study. It was based around just years in its replacement cycle. In looking at it as just only a year's variable, not mileage, not looking at its condition. The challenge point for just being just years is that's all you're focusing on. Some vehicles can drive longer. Some vehicles cannot. Some people, sometimes you buy a lemon, okay? But out of that, there are more variables than just years when you look at a replacement cycle. Last but not least, can you afford it as a commission and as the partners within the commission? We did notice in the VFIS study, when everyone was brought together, none of the agencies had a risk assessment or standards of cover assessment completed. Now, what do those studies do for you? One, they help you understand the resourcing you need for your community. You have some tight streets here. You have a few tall buildings, and I'm just looking just at downtown. Then you have a lot of rural setup in this area too. Part of that resourcing and those standards of cover, not looking as just as individual agencies, but as each or as a commission put together will allow you to know, are we resourcing correctly? Are we doing it in a cost-effective manner? Are we doing appropriate timing? Are we placing resources in the right place? And are we staffing correctly? Part of when I say staffing correctly, my family's from Southwest PA, outside Somerset. And I will tell you, there's a lot of volunteers. I grew up in a volunteer town and more gravel roads and paved roads, Kentstore, Virginia. A lot of volunteerism still there. But what we are also seeing is volunteerism decrease. You're probably seeing that in other areas. Fire and rescue are no different. Where people used to be able to live off of one income, now that both family members are working, you don't have as tight-knit of communities anymore where people hang around firehouses. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in these days. And because of that, to create an effective fire force, you need to understand what resourcing you need and personnel and understand the cost associated with this and develop strategic planning efforts to understand how to build programs to make sure that you're managing risk as a community. Next slide. So from our preliminary findings, we then decided to break down to understand how much risk is in your community that we could tell. We looked at data as it relates to Kennett Borough to understand how much volume you have in the community. And we started looking at the volume we asked for about, I think it was 3 years of data in working with fire chief. He helped us understand that the cleanest data was in 2022 because of some changes that had happened that we should look at just year 2022. So we did. In looking year 2022, there were 717 calls that happened in Kennett Borough. That was 1.96 calls a day. 1.96 calls in a 24-hour period. Of those calls, 71% of them were medical. We started looking at the time of day that they occurred. You know, we typically see at 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. are typically your lowest call volume because everybody's sleeping. 4 p.m., everybody's trying to rush home, trying to get out of work early, and then they crash their cars. Or, you know, most people, that's the busiest and most active period that we find. Next slide, I'm sorry. When we start looking at that, you can see what we call our distribution by hour, day a week. About 0.02 of a call happens at 4 a.m. And a little over about 16% or 1.6 of a call happens at 4 p.m. So that really means about 4 p.m., 1 out of every 5 days you have a call. On top of that, your average EMS incidents per day are about 1.3-ish, almost 1.4 calls that happen a day. So relatively low volume. Next slide. For the fire side of incidents, they make up the other portion of those calls. Of those fire portions, you have about 1.56, so between 0.5 and 0.6 calls a day. So relatively low volume, again, within your community. Next slide. So we took this from looking at just about volume because the volume being low, we wanted to understand next about distribution. So again, you're within this commission, we wanted to make sure you're getting fair coverage. We started looking, we created drive time maps. So let me tell you what the maps mean first, and then we'll talk or what their methodology is, and then we'll work backwards to what they mean. The methodology is we looked at the 3 fire stations that were placed, and then we gave it an 8-minute drive time for a fire response and an 11-minute drive time for an EMS response. Really, we broke down the EMS response because in the VFIS study, trying to keep it somewhat equal, they had a 12-minute EMS response. We said 60 seconds it takes to muster a unit and 11 minutes to drive. So that's where the 11 minutes came from. So we looked at the 2 stations since Kennett Square or Kennett our fire company no longer has an EMS unit. We'll look at the bottom chart. We then said, okay, is the borough being covered within that drive time in a meaningful way? So we looked at that 11-minute drive time on the bottom chart, and you can see the 2 stations where the commission deploys from. You see where it has the 11-minute drive time, and then it goes from light green to dark green. That dark green is where you have double overlap of units or multiple overlap of units. What you will see within your borough, and your borough being a donut within the entire commission, within that, you can see it all fits within the dark green, meaning both units can cover you well within the expected drive time. Then the eight minute, you can see how it covers the commission. It also, you can tell within your borough, you get 3 units that overlap in that same period of time, meaning in the expected drive time in emergency, you're deploying and getting meaningful response. Well, what does that mean for the commission? So we looked at it by square miles covered within the commission to understand what % of the commission is covered. So from an 8-minute drive time from all the 3 stations, about 38% of all the municipalities are covered within that 8-minute drive time. But from the 11-minute drive time, about 78% are covered from those 2 stations. So as you can see, about the 11-minute drive time covers not only you well, but it starts to begin to cover more of the municipality. If we added this 3rd station there, you could see how much more of the area that would be covered. Next slide. So this leads us talking into a little more about the agreement that's in place today, their municipal agreement. What we started to look at was some of the funding and some of the costing measures that are associated with. So in review of the contract, we really stuck in the next 3 sections about section 5, controls within the agreement as it relates to funding. Now, looking at the section 5.2, notwithstanding anything set forth in this agreement, except as unanimously approved by the municipalities, unanimously approved. The maximum amount of the commission budget during this commencement period shall be X dollars aggregated amongst the 6 municipalities for the commencement period. So let's think through this. You started this commission in 2018 and the commencement period ran until December of 2020. Up until that point, it took a unanimous vote if you were going to increase funds past a 3% or CPI. So consumer price index, actually just CPI or the 3%, excuse me. So for the years 18 to 19 and 19 to 20, cumulative increases from inception was 0. The operating costs actually managed at a 0% increase for 3 years. Starting in 2021, once that commencement period ended and it was no longer a unanimous vote, and it was a majority vote at the commission board, funds increased by 26.84%, up to $322,000 a year. Kind of a really stark increase, especially in, as you notice, went from a unanimous vote to a majority vote. In 2022, that increased again another 36%. So a cumulative increase since the commencement period is 72%. Now, our understanding is last year, there was supposed to be another 30% bump. And that 30% bump was said, okay, you can have 1 year where you're not going to have that 30%, but this next year you have to make up that full 60%. If that was the case and you're to make that up in year 2024, that means from the commencement period, the cumulative increase would now be 191% from when you started. And if that happens again, which is projected, you'll be 279% cumulative increase since inception of going into a commission that was supposed to control costs and better service the community. This is where, as we start looking at the agreement, we start looking at the equity within the agreement, and is the agreement set up to where it's good for all and not just negatively impacting certain parties. This is where we find that when the unanimous vote was approved to go above the 3% CPI increase, that was where all of a sudden the controls were removed and it became an inequitable agreement. Next slide. When we start talking about section 5.1, we start really looking at what we consider a form over function. when we start talking about form over function, we start explaining how the structure of an agreement or the agreement allows for proper implementation and proper expectations to be set for any agreement, any contract, any municipality, or working with a specific commission. Part of that form over function allows for the right hand, left hand, and all parties to understand exactly what they are working with, exactly what to expect. When we start looking at section 5.1, the commission shall approve and submit the municipalities an annual budget for the coming year. The commission shall put forth a budget to the municipalities. That's a good portion, a good thing, because as they push that forward, you should get some type of understanding of what that budget is, how much it's going to cost. Good? All right. How much it's going to cost, and then how much you can budget moving forward. What can you expect to spend, and what is the foresight that's coming to you? But the portion of the commencement or the commission's budget funded, I'm going to repeat that, the portion of the commission's budget funded by the municipalities shall take into account all sources of funding of income earned and or payable. But this is only saying the portion of the commission's budget, not the full budget. One of our challenge points with this is that when you're dealing with a commission and you're dealing with three partners, there needs to be transparency. And if you're going to have collaboration, you're going to have to work together. There's got to be transparency. Because what we say is willingness plus transparency equals collaboration. Willingness plus transparency equals collaboration. The reason why I bring that statement up is because in our review and in looking at Pennsylvania law, this is considered what they call a second class area. When we talk about second class area, next slide, please. We start to understand that means both from a township can be considered a second class area and a borough can be a second class area. And usually what they mean by second class is the way it's identified isn't from anything more than really population, okay? It's really based around, we're getting one head shake, so we're close. It's really based around population. So, but what those second class, it identifies certain sections in law related to emergency services. Under Pennsylvania law, for townships, under section 1553 emergency services, the township shall require any emergency services organization receiving township funds to provide to the township an annual itemized list of all expenditures of these funds before the township may consider budgeting additional funding to the organization. Now, that's townships. Other folks, and the reason why we read the townships is because you're part of a commission that has townships. But let's bring this back to the boroughs. The boroughs under Pennsylvania law, section 56, emergency services. The borough shall require any emergency services organization receiving borough funds to provide to the borough an annual itemized list of all expenditures of the funds before the borough may consider budgeting additional funding to the organization. Now, we bring this up because when we start talking and we've had conversations, a full list and approval of the budget has not always been provided, is our understanding. Of that, the commission, when they're looking to approve, is just able to approve and focus specifically on your funding, okay, that you provide to this commission. There needs to be transparency. It's clear under Pennsylvania law that you need an itemized budget to really understand what's going on, to help manage to and help to forecast. Next slide. So I understand we're sitting within council and most of you probably deal with budgets, but it's worth bringing up what a budget really is, because a budget is important to have more understanding too. We start talking about a budget and what it's understanding to is a budget is a line item that you manage your program. And we start a line item budget that's forward looking, is projecting what's into the future. It's something that you manage to. It's something that you make sure you're not overspending. It's not looking backwards. A budget is not to look backwards at. That's an audit. The difference is for, as we mentioned in Pennsylvania law, a budget is for a governing body to review and approve each line item or decrease the line items if needed and take them off the budget because they cannot afford. And then have monthly, quarterly, and annual reviews to make sure that overexpenditure is not happening. If they are, why, and how do we fund that into the future? In our review of the budget, we kind of stopped because again, we only received those two income statements of the Longwood and Kennett. But we went to look and see if other towns that were part of this intermunicipal had their budgets online. We looked at yours, so we went and looked at other partners you have. And we looked at Kennett Township and East Marlboro. These are their actual budgets and line items sitting right on the screen in front of you. There's a reason why we put that there, because this is what you expect to see in a line item budget, and this is what you would be approving. That to be said, in a budget, you don't typically see a lot of other expenditure lines. You don't see a lot of miscellaneous expenditure lines or revenue lines for that matter. We did see those within the budgets that were provided, a lot of others and municipal, or excuse me, and miscellaneous. Those would typically need to be classed somewhere to be managed to appropriately, because you really don't want just miscellaneous or well, it could just go into that bucket because it doesn't fit somewhere. It needs to be classed. Next slide. From a financial oversight perspective, again, we talked about this a little bit before, but there needs to be a financial audit. Of the financial audit, it should be by one firm, annual for all parties, and submitted to the commission annually. Next slide. So really the commission is at a crossroads. Do you stay within the commission or do you leave? Next slide. Now, to come up with how we came up with the recommendations we did at the beginning, we started to look at some of the challenges that we had as we started putting our modeling together. Now, our challenges were really because we didn't see the whole budget. We didn't have everything from the commission. We didn't have Pro Marlin, I'll say that correct, I hope, Pro Marlin's budget. So we didn't see the whole budget. We also weren't here to do a deep dive of the budget to say you should spend this or you shouldn't spend this. None of that was part within the scope. So what we used was the current budget, understanding what it is today, and then making options. If it was spending appropriately, what would it look like, apples to apples, if you move forward in any of the financial modelings? Now, none of these models look at you taking costs from other departments, cutting them, slashing them. This is just saying what would be the financial cost moving forward. Last but not least, to figure out the financial modeling and to understand, you really need to do a strategic planning effort looking at risk and scope, or in standards of cover. Next slide, please. So option one, as we had mentioned earlier, was staying within the commission. So in staying within the commission, we believe that you should stay there for an additional year. That was our initial finding. There are a couple reasons and we'll go through them. But one is really looking to set up and making sure those proper governance pieces that we had talked about were set in place. Of that, you should stay in for your normal percentage that you should, or whatever you choose as the governing body to pay to be within the commission. But you could also reference that Pennsylvania has put out an intermunicipal handbook that can help guide you through how this region should be set up and what you could do moving forward and should be part of your agreement. Furthermore, I won't belabor the point, but strategic planning efforts really need to be put in place to understand what resourcing is needed, both from assets and personnel. Next slide. We do believe the commission should hire an administrator. The administrator really is your eyes and ears and the person to help provide that budgetary oversight and accountability. We believe that the intermunicipal agreement should be updated to best practices and making sure that it is set forth, or it is set up with the right equity for all partners, for a true partnership that you would be in. And financial controls are put in place that create a unanimous vote on any increase above CPI or 3%. Policies need to be fully completed and administrator put in place to hold accountable. Have an independent third party calculate the distribution. The distribution, again, we felt was objective, but just for another level of transparency, having a third party put those calculations together. Could be a finance person within one of the boroughs with the checks and balances from another township. And consider the cost of fire apparatus is escalating, utilizing a replacement cycle that's not just based solely on age, but based on age, mileage, functionality, and cost. Next slide. So we looked at the Kennett Borough and your current spend as it relates to the commission. So we put together a quick income statement of what your spend is. Now I see that's small on the screen, so I'll kind of do a little bit of talking through. The one that's highlighted in gray in the middle is really your spend, which is put on the income statement about $560,000 of what was put as a borough spend. However, what we learned in this is that the borough of Kennett Square has put in about $470,000. The commission has put in more than that as a overall spend for Kennett Borough's subsidy. We looked at the straight line expenditures and noticed a net loss annually of about $255,000, meaning that Kennett Borough is in to the commission, and the commission is subsidizing the program here within the community about $250,000. We start looking at that and we deep dive that a little more. We decided to try to go through the budget and see if there was some way to line item, but we could only find about $44,000 that you could lean out that seemed to glare at us. But again, we weren't here to do a deep dive and do an audit. We were just to see if there's a way to lean. That's the one that's option 1C. Option 1A, if you were to choose to go in and say you were going to pay the other 30% to really get caught up to where you are within the diversion of 30% before, you would owe an additional $284,000 this upcoming year, which is almost double what you're spending today to be part of this commission. That would be your options for option 1 if you were to stay in it from a financial positioning. Next slide. Option 2 is you decide to work directly with Kennett Fire Company. Remove yourself from the commission and work directly with the fire company. This again would be a council choice if you were to do that, but if you were to do, we believe you should put the proper controls in place, both from an operations finance perspective and accountability. Costs for option 2 can be reduced and or increased depending on the module you choose. Again, this wasn't something we deep dove and what your expenditure should be. But what we will tell you is there is a risk that, yeah, you might save some money, but it could become expensive quickly if you were there to try to operate this yourself. One of the other pieces is Kennett Fire Company is an independent fire company. They don't have to choose to respond within the community. So it'd be something that you would have to work with them to, as a partnership, if they were to leave the commission and to want to continue servicing the borough, you would need to work with them directly. The other part is within the commission, they also do your EMS and your ambulance response. You would need to either work to go out to RFP to develop or build an ambulance company internally with providers to respond, either BLS, and if you needed advanced life support, potentially contract with the neighboring agency. Now, I say that all to say is the biggest risk. The biggest risk would be if Kennett Fire Company chooses for some reason, even though they're within or near your area, to not respond. That is a risk. That is a choice because they are an independent party. A further risk is if the fire commission, that you are the whole of the donut, chooses not to provide mutual aid as backup. We would make a recommendation if you were to move away, that you continue still being a supportive partner and provide mutual aid to your neighbors, because it's still neighbors helping neighbors. But you can't control if the commission chooses not to respond to you as a mutual aid partner. That is a risk. Next slide. Under these options and steps forward, we've really looked at a high level if you were to bring this in-house. To bring this in-house, there are multiple steps, and we just highlighted about the top 6 steps it would take to bring them in. And I will tell you, to do this, time is not on your side. This takes time to build this, to move the funds, to put all the pieces in place. to get all the resolutions, the votes, to figure out everything that needs to be done if you were to try to move this in-house. So trying for a July 1 to move in 6 months, that's a fast timeline. So time, if you were to choose this option, is not on your side. Next slide. Now, we did look at some financial options for this, and I will tell you, none of these options are cheaper than being within the commission. Because when you were looking at doing this, you're building it yourself. You're looking to either partner or build an ambulance response for your community for a small number of calls that don't create a large amount of revenue. Being part of a commission where you can actually leverage your partner's response, and still get good coverage and capture more revenue decreases the overall cost. However, again, if costs are increasing from a subsidy that surpasses where you're at, then it becomes a policy choice on what you do from there. When we looked at it, there are multiple different ways and policy choices that you can make if you were to bring this in-house. We just created 5 different models. And of those models, we're looking to bring and staff the units, 3 of them, as the fire company is today. Bring the staff in and leaving them on their same shifts. They were to do that and then outsource the EMS agency and do that not to Longwood, but go out to an RFP process. That could cost you about $572,000 a year. That includes not only those staff, but also we put in this budget $20,000 to utilize your 2 public works folks as backup if need be to help bolster your effective fire force. Of that, we also then look at option 2B, which is continuing with those internal staff as they are today, and Kennett Fire Company operating a basic life support ambulance, and then partnering with either Longwood or someone else to do the advanced life support, and then paying them a per call subsidy of a specific rate. And we added that rate in here. That cost to do that would cost about $464,000 more than you're spending today. Option C, along those same lines, continuing with the internal staff and outsourcing just EMS to Longwood and continue using their ALS unit, does decrease the cost some, but it still spends more of about $432,000 than you are today. If you were to adjust the model and say the current staff members on their current shifts, and we decide to change how they're deploying, and we try to build some type of effective fire force while waiting for a mutual aid partner to come, option 2D, building or using your internal staff for two personnel 24/7, 7 days a week, and then building a BLS ambulance that could also do fire response. So effectively 4 people, having 2 folks from public works helping during the day, making 6 during the day, relying on partners at night, and then outsourcing the ALS or the ALS to Longwood. All of those moves would cost you about $663,000 a year. And last but not least, 2E, only having 1 person working on the engine 24/7, 2 people on a BLS ambulance, and then outsourcing ALS to Longwood while using two of your own public works staff to assist is the cheapest model for bringing it internal, but still is $324,000 more than you're spending today. Next slide. Option 3, again, we didn't present this on your recommendations, but if you were to just say, okay, we're going to build it ourselves irrespective of who's here, we didn't even bother modeling that, because if those costs are not something that you can financially have, you definitely aren't going to look at that one. So we basically put that in play, or just kind of took that off the table. Next slide. Oh, thank you. You're already there. So we did a model comparison, each one for the cheapest to move forward. As you will see, and as we mentioned, staying within the commission at this point is the cheapest. However, it's cheapest now. If they continue rising at 30% year over year without proper controls, you can actually surpass your spending quicker. And in another couple of years, you can actually surpass if the funding is not controlled appropriately from the commission. Next slide. Now, to make sure I wasn't losing my mind when we started walking through all those financial modeling, we then decided to take out all subsidies, just remove it from our modeling, take out all depreciation costs, and just look at the operating income versus the operating expense. Just look at them separately. What we found, and we looked at same options across that were on the last slide, still the three in the green that were the cheapest is being part of the commission. So irrespective of looking at it in two different ways, the cheaper model is to stay within the commission. Again, it only stays that way cheapest if proper controls and the intermunicipal agreement is updated and adjusted. Next slide. Now, we talk about funding because funding, no matter what municipality you are, is challenged at times. There are options out there like the SAFER grant for personnel that's out with the federal government. There are also assistance to fire grants, the AFG grants. There's actually somebody that I know here within Chester County that actually does a lot of grant writing for equipment and training. So you could leverage that, and hopefully that's something you all looked into to be able to look at grants as you start to move forward. Next slide. So I'm going to end today at the same slide we started with. Was really, this is more about a policy decision, but also putting proper controls in place, we believe, to ensure there's an equitable set for you at the table as being part of the commission. This willingness, transparency equals collaboration. If there's not a willingness for all partners to adjust the agreement, there's not transparency in the process from a funding and controls set up for the commission with all the spending that's happening within all three parties within the commission, and there's not collaboration from everyone involved, then this isn't going to work. But you need those three to make sure that you're set up in such a way to be successful for your borough moving forward. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Todd. Appreciate you and your team and all the work that you've put into this. What I'd like to do is right now we'll have council discussion, questions back and forth. I do want to open up time for public comment. And, you know, the whole purpose of this was for us to get a better picture, for us to get some information that may from an objective third party that just helps us ask the right questions and make the right decisions. So that's really what I'm asking from the public tonight too, with your questions and comments, is just what aren't we considering? What should we be considering? And what hasn't been asked yet? What I wouldn't like to do is have this be a back and forth between anybody. So what I would like to do is maybe Todd, if you and team could have some time with the chiefs tomorrow, just to do an internal question and answer on a lot of maybe the numbers or some things. I think that would be really helpful, if that would be good.
Might not be tomorrow or in flight, but
Okay,
definitely, yeah.
but that would be good. Chief, would you be okay with that? Just give us some time to process all this. Council, questions for the team? Any comments and thoughts? Nobody wants to dive in first? I'll start. Todd, I know that you said that, I mean, you pushed a lot in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and we appreciate that. It looked like what you were giving us was not assumptions, though. It was based on what you found. So what maybe might we be missing because you didn't get that other month or two?
You know, the biggest thing, if you wanted to deep dive into the finances, that was not here for us. You know, we basically just straight lined everything that was going on within the finances. So if you wanted to try to go in, look at deep dive the finances, are the expenditures being done right? Are the processes? What's all this? That we didn't get all the finances. We didn't see that, and that wasn't a part of the scope.
Mhm.
If that's something you were looking at, absolutely, that you're there for that piece of it. I think that's the biggest, really, as we start looking at the intent of everybody coming together, the intent's right. The intent for bringing the commission together, what the intent was for this to be put together to better service the community. As you can see from all the drive time, the mapping, what's in place, the intent's there. It's the impact of creating an equitable situation for all parties. And for that, I believe we had a really good review. We had good information provided to us. But I think if you were to go back and look at the finance, is it set up correctly? Is, you know, the funding, how's the funding coming in? What gaps may be in the funding? What gaps may be coming in the future? You should look there.
I'll throw a couple out if I may.
Yeah.
Can you again share your qualifications and what gives you the ability to answer these sorts of questions in some detail?
Yeah, absolutely. So our firm's been around for about 40 years. We do both fire, EMS, we do police studies, we do public safety. We have a firm of about 60 people. My background is in fire and EMS. Part of our firm is what we call management services. We physically go on site and manage companies. So we put people on site that manage the CEO, executive directors, hospital executives. And that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years with the firm, almost 10 years. And now we will operate a team of folks that work with me and that work with other partners within the firm to, help agencies such as yours. Also sitting with me here is Bill Sturgeon. Bill has been both a fire chief and a county manager. So he's actually sat in Cal's shoes and had to go through these processes together. And he's been with me since the inception of this. Also, we partner with different GIS folks and we partner with different PhDs who do our data analysis to make sure that we are above board as we start walking through to make sure we're looking at this objectively and that when we're setting our recommendations are grounded in objective views and it's just not based on opinion.
Most people, at least that I've spoken to, think the quality of care of services between the fire companies and the EMS providers is wonderful, is top notch. So first, thanks to those folks that are here and aren't here that do that. Do you have any opinion as to whether that's correct or incorrect through your research?
This study was not commissioned in such a way that we looked at, are they providing a great service? Are they giving it? My best guess is what we can tell is the providers are here to do right. Okay. They do right by the citizens. This study is not commissioned or was not looked at in such a way about the providers and how they interact day to day. This had nothing to do with the providers. This is really about governance and making sure that the community is set up here in Kennett Borough in such a way that being part of the commission, allowing those providers to do what they do best is set up that's sustainable for your citizens, constituents, and also you can afford being a part of that into the future.
I think the entire council certainly agrees that the quality and level of services is beyond dispute and much appreciated. How about the financial side of that question? Based on other communities where you've done similar sorts of studies, can you share any opinion in terms of the cost of those services for similar communities?
So let me kind of say it this way. So we can say cost for communities. The difference is what is the risk within the community and what are the funds within the community? Is a commission or is a fire department set up in such a way that they have unlimited funding? They have a very affluent area with a good tax base that they can all be paid, okay? Is a tax base set up in such a way that you can have certain quality of equipment? Or are you not? Each community is different. Each risk level is different. This is one reason why as we started to look through our study, this study, as we commissioned, it was not something that we looked at to know whether or not the finances were correct. We looked at this was about, are we good today and what does the future look like? This is one reason why as a firm, we said you needed to have a strategic planning element to what you do moving forward. And when we talk about strategic planning element, this is one, but understanding your relative risk within the community. How many resources do you need? What type of resources do you need? When we start thinking about those, not one community is the same. It doesn't matter if you're in Virginia, Florida, here in Pennsylvania. Every community is different. Every community has a different makeup on what they can afford, what their risk is. Do you have a big fuel farm in your backyard? Do you have an airport? What do you have that creates a different level of risk that you need to staff to? So when you start talking about what you're funding to, that's really an opinion question that has to be deep dive more. What we will say is when you straight line and you start looking at cost and the cost effectiveness, the commission should be in a position to where as a borough, you're actually getting a better service at a better cost. And so that's when you're putting that, but the proper controls are in place, you should be getting that. And that's really what our findings were focused on.
I believe the commission does get the line item budgets from each of the fire companies. How would having more detail within those budgets impact the potential cost?
Well, I think it would help us understand more of the potential losses that are occurring. So year over year, what we're understanding and what we're seeing is that there's this expenditure that has been being utilized. And we start talking about expenditures that are being utilized that are over budget. We started to notice that when we looked at certain budgets, they had been overspent the past few years. Then we started to ask more questions about funding and realized that there was a trust that was funding some of the capital assets. So what happens if something happens to that trust, right? It's a part of the commission. Us only seeing a portion of that budget doesn't give us the full picture, okay? But what it does do is it says, okay, what is happening today, which we saw negative numbers within the budget. We did ask a little bit about the funding of funds that were within the trust. And as part of the commission, you seeing all the line item budgets, you approving those and you having proper controls in place can curb any maybe excess spending, any certain salaries that may or may not be within there, future FTE hiring, future vehicle purchases. You as a commission can help manage that because you're utilizing taxpayer funding to ultimately support this commission.
Was there any inappropriate spending on your review?
Nothing that, I mean, this wasn't an audit, so I really couldn't answer that one for you.
Is it reasonable to expect 3 different fire companies that are all nonprofits in their own right to really use the same auditor? Seems like that's a stretch.
I mean, that's again a policy decision at the commission level, but I believe if you're wanting to have transparency at a commission level, that should be what you expect.
Just a couple more questions. You recommended the borough stay for a year, but I think you said only by a 3% or CPI increase. That's not the way the commission is made up. It's made up of borough being one of 6. That doesn't necessarily have to happen.
You're correct. And that is something that you as the policymakers would ultimately, again, this is a policy decision. And this is something you'd belabor. Is this something that you want to spend the extra money? Is it something you want to work with the commission, ask for some type of reasonable accommodation? But this ultimately lands back into a policy decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Both.
You did answer a lot of them. I know that.
No worries.
I guess I just have one. I know you mentioned that there's. Imagine that's only going to continue to get worse. So, are there other creative ways that you guys? Costs?
Other areas are getting creative, but between doing drives, working with other not-for-profits, working with your hospitals that maybe have different foundations that can help support community and capital costing. We've seen folks do different type of partnerships. We've also, again, being aggressive within the grant funding is another key one. So trying to help that get put in place, I think it's going to be, some relief as it relates to overall taxpayer funding.
Any other questions? Seems to be none from council, so I will open it up for public comment. So public comment, if you can keep your comments to under 3 minutes, that would be great. If there are questions that do come up and we can't answer them tonight, we'll get them in writing or address at a later time. Thanks so much, Tom.
Talk. I believe the biggest problem when you have 3 communities or 5 communities or thing is egos. And I think that council wants to do what's best for the borough. Kennet Township wants to do what's best for Kennet Township. Palmar will do it. You got to get together and say, we're working for the people. And I agree with you. You need an administrator who's responsible. You need an audit, and I think you got to get as much of an audit as you can get every year. And you got to have somebody that can say, hey, cut that, or we need to do this over here, and be responsible. I was really impressed. I think we got an idea. I mean, I've seen people on our own council who were on the commission fight with each other. So I can imagine they fought with Kennet Township and Paul Marlin. Everybody's fighting with everybody with good intentions. I don't think that they bad intentions. I said, but everybody's trying to take care of themselves. And it's got to be, you got all three groups got to take care of all the people. In other words, they got to look at it and say, I don't care if you're from Kennet or Unionville or Township. These people hurting out there, we got to go help them. And don't look at them as a township or they got to be a commission's got to be one group. And I was pleased with your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Chief, I saw you standing up there. You sure? All right.
In preparation, I got on Google, right? But first of all, the first point, what went wrong? And Mr. President, I know you don't want to get into that, but if you don't learn from the mistake, you're doomed to repeat it. So everything you said about governance and oversight, responsibility, accountability, why are there no audited financials? Why was there a change from unanimous to majority? That has to be answered, and we have to understand that so it doesn't happen again. And I'm not talking about cutting anybody's head off, but you just have to learn why that happened so it doesn't happen again. So that's one. Two, back to Google. So your risk assessment, standards of coverage, workload assessment, that makes perfect sense because what I learned was response time is miles and traffic in those miles, right? So pretty simple stuff. And then I did some little benchmarking of my own because I grew up in Northeast Philly. So I looked at Philadelphia and I looked at the location of Pomarlin, Longwood, and Kennett Square Fire Department, and they're within a 2-mile radius circle. They're very close. And I looked at Northeast Philly and they're well over 3.5 miles apart, and they have a lot more traffic and a lot more people. So then you start to think about benchmarking and what level of service do we need? What type of equipment do we need? Is the location right? And this goes to the oversight provided by the commission. So if all the calls, or not all, but a significant number of calls in Kennet Borough were EMT, I don't know what Pomarlin is. I don't know what Longwood is. You didn't have that data or you didn't show it. But do we have the right type of equipment and in the right locations? And that's what the commission should be doing. So it goes right back to oversight. And again, how did we get here? What I think we should also look at is the prudence of the past increases. So because your financial analysis just takes us forward and kind of assumes that they're correct, as opposed to were they prudent? And if we reevaluate that, we may find that the scariness of option 2 isn't quite so scary because it may be that it's based on estimates that are horrific to begin with. And I think the other thing, and it wasn't clear to me, was option 2 assumes that only Kennett Square funds Kennett Fire Company. Whereas before, we would get funds from Kennett Township and because they would respond. And your response map kind of embedded in there is that Kennett Square or Kennett Fire Company is going down into Kennett Township and responding. So that is a reality. We would be the best responder to portions of the township. And so that would have to be looked at as well. So that's all I had, and I hope you consider my question.
Thank you, Dr. Mallon.
I hope we have more to hear from fire department volunteers. And I don't know who the Chester County Fire Marshal is. I don't know where he's at. But there are people in Chester County who've always led Chester County. We had a group here that does studies. Am I correct? Just studies. But I want to hear from the men who have the hats and the hatchets in their hands. We haven't heard that tonight, so I don't think you can take a responsible vote on anything because you're going to bring the experts in. Also, Westchester has one of the biggest ambulance response that I know. So you better get some of them in, so you can hear something about it, whatever you're trying to control. Because I'm going to say this to you. When this idea was proposed, it was the best idea since hot cakes or hot pants. I don't know which one. And we heard the mayor sat right down there and negotiated that contract. And it was all this talk, negotiated business, all between ALS. I had to listen to over an hour. And the EMS and all these descriptions of medical response. Medic 94 is right up there in West Grove, and it got expert life-saving support. If we want to outsource this, so we don't even never have to worry about it. We don't even have to pay for it. Let that come in that bay, let them run it, let them make their profit if they do such a thing. We're not even thinking. But the fire department, I wasn't for no consolidation, but you did it. So now I'm going to tell you they're local people and I support them because they need jobs and they're the people here that we trust. And we didn't see nothing wrong with no service for that question ever to come across. No one here has complained about the Cannon Fire Department or the ambulance. I heard one person say something about time response once, and that's one person, and that whistle's been going off too much. I'm telling you, you're going to get control of that on this consortium. Or commission, whatever you call yourselves. But we don't want to hear them run through our town when we're not using them. That's the number one complaint you should have thought about. Between the dogs barking, we're hearing them. We were a quiet town, 1 square mile, sedate. Now we got a metropolis in 1 square mile. But here's the questions I had. I don't want to eliminate the fire department. Because I feel when a person, I was a teacher, I was the administrator. And I didn't go in them classrooms to fire people. I didn't go in them classrooms to eat them up. I went in there to work beside them. And if there was something that needed to be improved, then I had to mentor that. And that's what I think is in line here. If there's such a thing, we need to all go back, take a step back, and figure out how we can all cooperatively work together. It's not about no egos. It's about objectivity. And when I went in them classrooms, I had bullet points. And this is what I'm going to help you with, because the next person come in here might eat you up, but this is how I'm going to walk with you. That's what I think needs to happen, number one. Bring people cooperatively together, and I don't suggest anybody from up there. And I don't want to give you a fire department to build. I'm scared of that, because this is where it's led us. Safety, I didn't hear enough about that because I'm concerned about safety. I'm concerned about all these high rises going up and these young men going out there on those calls because you're setting hazards in here. And to go back to your zoning and you're building houses, you're building them too tight. And then these boys got to risk their lives. And the ladders don't go that far, but they're young and heroic and they think they can. And I'm telling you, don't do things above being heroic or you're going to lose your life. Because when you're a helper, you tend to do that. You extend yourself past what you're humanly possible to do. I don't want anybody being a martyr for Kennett Square. If it's a terrible situation because the building's too high, it's just a terrible situation. We saw it with 9/11 and boy, was it a heartbreaker. I mean, you build them too tight like they do down Center City, University of Penn, one big building 3 foot from the other one. It is a hazard. There's no rescue there. There's going to be more fatalities if there's ever a problem. And we're building them in here like in this 1 square mile. We can't do Emerald City here. We just can't do it. Safety for these guys is very important. And I think if anything needs to be separated, maybe it is the EMS. But I think it needs to be a private entity on its own. Sorry. Maybe we don't need to be responsible at all. Pay rent to you, the fire department. Pay rent to you. And let them have their business where they make the profit. Because my insurance pays for that. So there's other people's insurance. We had a calamity here where Kennett was coming out and Southern Chester County was coming out too. And I had to say, I'm only paying one of you boys once when I was on the stretcher. I forget when that was. There was a big war on turf up in here, but that's it. But who's going to govern? They do need a central financial accountant, I would say. I don't want to say officer. I want to say accountant. Somebody that's only going to be spitting out numbers. They need that to look at the resources, to look at the salaries. Because we can't be going out of control with that, because that's a problem. Benefits and your liability coming with insurances. I didn't hear too much about that because I know you can't split every hair. But insurances for liability are big. And that's one of the things that we need to look into. You should have thought about it before you went that broad,
Thank you, Ms. Watson.
but we couldn't tell you nothing. Remember that. We couldn't tell you nothing. You knew it all.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Chief, I gave her a couple more minutes, so I'll give you a couple more minutes
I
too.
appreciate it. Does it count if I have 3 properties in the borough? I get 9 minutes?
3.5 minutes.
For you that don't know me, I'm AJ McCarthy. I'm the fire chief for Longwood Fire Company, and I function as the regional fire chief for our regionalization. So I do have some questions first. When did you guys get this report? Not tonight. You've had it before this. So when did you get the?
We had a draft last week.
What's up? When last week? Okay. So tonight was supposed to be about transparency and open conversations. Now, when we were originally asked if we were going to be involved in this process, Kyle told us that we would get the results. And then about a week after it, we got an email sent that asking for a lot more information than a high level review. And, nothing against these gentlemen. They did a quick job in a short amount of time. But you asked me a couple minutes ago if I could talk because you need some time to process, right? This is an evaluation along with Fire Company. You wanted to have open dialogue tonight. Why didn't I get the courtesy of getting this draft so I could review not only the accuracy of the information I provided, but I had some time to digest so I could actually have dialogue in front of the community with the consultants that we paid $20,000+ for. That's not transparent. It's irresponsible. That's your fault. This commission here. So let's correct a couple narratives. It's an actual legal municipal entity. It gets an audit every year. You get it. The fire companies provide you monthly activity reports on everything that we do. You get it. We give you quarterly profit and loss statements and financials. You get it. Kyle gets it, the mayor gets it, and now Sam gets it. So if you don't have it, look in your house, not mine. This is your problem. You have a problem. You are uncooperative. You're getting exactly out of the commission what you're putting into it when you're there. This is the problem. Are we going to continue to do this every year? How much money have we wasted? I've been studied probably, 7 or 8 times now since I've been fire chief, and you still come to the same conclusions. When are we actually going to start protecting the people? I'm tired of being the only one looking out for them because it's not you. That's what you're elected to do, but it's not you. This commission was developed with your input. You were on council, you were on council. You came up with these documents. You signed them, you made the ordinances, you voted on them. These aren't surprises. You know what the commencement period was for. You knew why it stayed funding, and to correct it, your funding stayed flat for 3 years. Operational expenses didn't stay flat for 3 years. That's not what happened. But this was you guys. I don't care, and I'm going to go on record, so please make sure everyone hears this. I don't care if you hire an administrator. I asked 2 questions when we were doing it. Who do they work for, and what are they going to do? Right? But we don't vote. The 3 fire companies on the commission, we don't vote. So this whole process about how the information keeps getting passed around that I run the commission, that needs to stop. And that's misinformation that comes out of this borough. And we've heard it recently. You can attest, some of the people that are probably talking tonight, you continue to do it. Buy the biggest and expensive things, all the bells and whistles. You get talked to just before we buy every fire trucks and what we're doing. I come to you and tell you that we're adding staff. We talk about it, but you don't cover 100% of the fire company budgets. We're, as stated earlier, we're independent nonprofit organizations. We have board of directors. They're elected by the membership. They have people involved in them. We have internal controls. We provide everything to you. We go through the budgets. The budgets that you get in the commission were developed at the commission. The chart of accounts that we use came out of commission meetings where the commission members voted to use them. This was you guys. If this information isn't coming back to you, you have no one to blame but yourselves. It's not us. For years, we fought with the Kennett Fire Company, Hatfield and McCoy's. Anybody here going to disagree with it? Probably not. Now that we've actually been able to put it aside, make some progress, and start actually protecting people, nobody seems to like it. I can't tell if it's because you can't drive the wedge anymore, or if that's really where the control came from. Dangling the dollar and we always chased it. But you're not going to split us up, and that's what's trying to happen right now. And they're going to speak for themselves. I'm not going to speak for them, but you're not going to split us up. We're doing good things for these people. And it's a commission. This report looks at 1/6 of the commission's activities. Did you talk to the commission chairman? Did you get an opportunity to talk to the commission chairman? Okay. You tout this like this is supposed to be some big benefit to the commission. This is just a weak poker hand. You didn't talk to the commission. They asked me for most of the commission documents. I have no idea why I had to do your work for you. But because again, I wasn't going to be involved. Your manager told me so. In fact, they were told to ask the county for the information and not talk to us. I don't know how you do a report without that, but that's ridiculous. But this is the cooperation that we've come to expect from you guys. But you want me to drop what I'm doing tomorrow so I can talk to your consultants to make sure we have everything ironed out. I got 8 business days to pull all this together. Didn't get a heads up that you're going to do it. Didn't get said, hey, can you come to the finance committee, answer some questions for us? I have elected officials in my office weekly. Budget questions, operational questions. It's not a trust fund. We go over the endowment that left from wills, right? So let's clarify that. It's not, there's 900,000 left in it. Just so you're aware, we spent over $1 million of it putting a second ambulance service at the request of Kennett Borough when Leon Spencer was mayor, with the promise that the funding from the borough would come to follow. 20 years later, we're still seem to be having that conversation. You have a busy town. So a couple more questions I have for you guys. We seem to be so strict on control of these independent nonprofit fire departments. You guys get audits. Who does your third-party evaluation on your finances and your staffing study? Can you provide me the space needs assessment for this building?
Thank you, Chief.
You can continue to fight me all you want. It's not going to work. I'm looking out for this community. I think I have a pretty long history of doing things for this town without bias. And that's the problem. This is a personality problem. This is nothing more than a witch hunt. I didn't get asked one single question about Kennett Fire Company's finances. And I was the representative for both fire companies. Got plenty about mine, but not one about Kennett. So let's call what it is. What is it? If you don't want to work with us, I would prefer you just tell me that. It would make it easier, but you may not get that choice. So I keep hearing that you can't afford it. So I hired an economist and I evaluated you. And I'm going to make it available to the public. You know what they tell me? They tell me that you're in the best financial position you've been in over 10 years. You just had a bond rating increase. You're doing pretty well. I've tried to work with you guys. I met with you. That didn't go anywhere. What's the deal? When are we going to start getting serious about protecting these people? This place over the weekend was a nut house. Crazy. This is a flourishing town. It requires infrastructure. That's us too. I read in the finance committee, Kyle's going to do evaluations on per capita costs. Don't see you doing that about the police department. And no disrespect to you, Chief Holdsworth. I'm sorry that they took $20-some thousand from your budget. You need it too. Ain't no reason he should have to go get grants to get police cars.
Thanks, Chief. I think we're at the point where you've made your point, and I don't want this to get any more contentious.
It's a little late for that, President.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll be back with some more questions.
Thank you.
Ken Edwards, 412 Meredith Street. I myself am a former volunteer firefighter, so I know what these ladies and gentlemen go through. I did it for 8 years before I entered the military. I've tried to warn you people up here to do things the right way, not the back door, not the old way, not the country way, but you don't listen. I've talked to members of both fire companies, both Longwood and Kennett, because I like to get both sides of the story. When everything started to fall apart between the two of them a couple of years ago, I know that a lot of guys and a lot of ladies left Kennett because of it. That was their choice. But you have to remember, you are the responsible parties in this whole mess. Now, I know there's only 2 people up front that have been here for a while, and they know where I'm coming from. I've warned you. Stuff is going to come around that you do backdoor and bite you on the hiney. That was only a nibble.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Good evening. Peter Doring, 315 East Linden. Thanks for a very comprehensive presentation. Lots of interesting data. I have kind of 2 questions I would look forward to kind of hearing answers for either tonight or at a later point, and 1 comment. So as I looked at the commission, one of the things that just struck me is 1.1 square miles within a commission that covers almost 50. And so one of my questions I would love to see more detail on is whether that Kennett really is to what extent is the borough paying more, even though the services actually have to cover a much smaller distance? Is that taken into account when apportioning what Kennett should be paying? Because if we have a fire company or an EMS station located here and we're 1 square mile, we're putting a lot less mileage on vehicles, we're getting a faster response time. I think I would be interested to see how that gets taken into consideration. I also had occasion last year, the year before, to look at the vehicle review that was done in 2021. And one of the questions that I thought was left over was whether the various fire companies had put together a capital plan that set aside money for the eventual replacement of these vehicles. And to what extent is the lack of a capital plan kind of a liability going forward in terms of planning? Because it sounds like the real key decision point is to what extent are these costs going to increase? Related to the capital plan, to what extent is it necessary for the fire companies to coordinate across each other to get the equipment that is needed across the area? I've seen questions raised about equipment that's been purchased that's not necessarily needed, equipment that's been customized where that might not necessarily be true, or the vehicle review also talked about equipment that was not suitable for the environment. So a long-term plan that looks at what kind of equipment is needed if the borough stays in the commission, I think would be really interesting. But from what the presentation tonight, the thoughts that I have is it seems like it would be a rush to try to move out of the commission immediately. I like the idea of a period of time to see if there's an administrator who can get a handle on the budgets. Whether that is 1 year or 2 years might be a question because it takes a while for that administrator to be hired and put in place. And perhaps during that time, there can be some flexibility the commission can grant, including the return of unanimous voting. This is like the start of the commission. You are reevaluating the commission, so why not return to the unanimous vote? A second idea that I think is really good is the idea of sharing employees, public employees, to have them serve potentially dual roles. Is that something that could be tried out, and what impact would that have? And would that demonstrate greater flexibility amongst some of the fire companies to accommodate some of these changes? But ultimately, I think it will probably take a year or 2 to see what those other increases are and whether it's worth the borough staying in. I do agree that it is fundamentally a problem of governance. Preparing these budgets in advance is extremely complex. I've never seen an organization with a financial structure as complex as a fire EMS service. So I understand the challenges of getting those budgets in a timely manner. but ultimately getting those budgets in time and with sufficient detail for the public to ask questions about why costs are increasing is going to be absolutely essential to making the right decisions going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dorian.
My name is Jim Mercanti. I live in New Garden Township, but I do a lot of community service work in Kennett area. I'm a little embarrassed to come up and talk about this after the eloquent presentations, especially by the chief. But for about the past 2.5 years, myself and another community volunteer, Joan Holliday, have been working on the issues of lack of internet coverage and cellular coverage throughout southern Chester County, now all of Chester County. And when we did an assessment, it became clear to us that there are parts of Chester County, certainly southern Chester County, that have no cellular service. This came out because of the virtual learning of the schools, where kids were trying to do virtual learning on their handhelds, had no service, and had to go to Starbucks and other places to get cellular coverage. The reason this is germane to this conversation is because if you're riding down the road and you have an accident and you want to dial 911 and you don't have cellular coverage, then you are basically at risk. If these people that provide excellent service, the fire and the police, are at an emergency site and don't have cellular coverage, they may not be able to get the type of help that they need. So we should know by every square inch where there is cellular coverage, where there isn't cellular coverage, and we should make sure that there is no part of this particular area that does not have cellular coverage. This young lady also talked about getting on the internet and doing research. And so did somebody else talk about Google. If you don't have access to the internet, then you can't do that sort of research. You can't contact people if you don't have the transportation. So I would suggest that you put that in your strategic plan, not necessarily your short-term plan, but your strategic plan. It's easy to think of that as a long-term thing, but there are things that are going to happen in the decades of 2030 and 2040 where we'll be able to have homes that will have wireless connectivity back to police stations and fire stations, so that someday no one will ever have to die because of a fire in their home or in their business. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mercanti.
Ethan Kramer, 714 South Garfield. I think this is an incredibly complicated question, and of all the facts that have been put out, there are many that have either another spin or have another version. I would note, for example, that there was never unanimous voting. The agreement was that there would be no change to the budget in terms of what was asked for from the municipalities for the first 3 years. And the idea was that that could be changed by unanimous vote, but that was just an escape clause for something that was not intended to be voted on. So that's not accurate to say there was ever contemplated a unanimous vote. And in fact, the main point that I want to make is that this entity, the commission, is an effort to figure out how to do municipal governance at the regional level. And it's an innovative effort, and it's a structured effort. It's an effort that has borne fruit. I think it's worth noting that the Kennett Fire Company has gone from 8 or 10 volunteers to 30 that made the cut for getting a stipend in the last year. That has a lot to do with the commission. And that was one of the commission's main charges, was to keep Kennett Fire Company open, and Kennett Fire Company is thriving, and our hats off to them. But this effort is about the things that a single individual entity, municipal entity can't do, that the borough can't do by itself. And the commission, for its foibles, for its problems, for whatever the concerns are, is a structured table, is a place where there are rules and the rules are clear. If the rules are not being followed, some of those have been extensively discussed. For example, that issue of the administrator, there was a full discussion, and I was part of that and represented the borough at that discussion. But that could have been brought up again. And certainly all of these things that are concerns can be brought up within the commission. That's what is needed. And regardless of what the decision is in terms of what the borough does next. There are so many aspects of what we have to be as a modern municipal government that are about interacting with our neighbors. And so regardless of where you all go, I think there's an enormous call to make sure that this kind of effort, commission or any other, makes sense, right? The future of policing has to be regionalization. The future of EMS has to be regionalization. The future of all of these things have to be, and we have to be at the table with a strong voice. And there is no other choice, because these are the kinds of things that are too complicated and too big to take on as a single municipal entity for anyone. So there will be a lot of questions, I think, as you all move forward. The commission, for all the things that you've spoken about, is a place where you can raise all of those questions in a context that is structured and ready to have that discussion. And it would be a shame for the borough to lose its access to that table because it hasn't brought up those issues in this context and gotten the answers it wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Corey McIntosh, 825 Taylor Street, and I'm also president of the County Fire Company. Want to talk tonight just on kind of the feelings of the County Fire Company from my discussions with our various members. So over the past 3 years, the fire company has been faced with uncertainty brought about by our community leaders. In 2021, that was originally with Kennett Township brought this on. During this time, we met with Mayor Fedek a number of times, and he told us whatever we decide, the borough has supports us. I'm here tonight to tell you that while that may be true, we're not feeling that support. A year ago, we sat here and implored you to stay within the commission. Today, 12 months later, here we stand again, having the similar discussion. Based on the report that was read today, that, very detailed, I appreciate it. It sounds like the recommendation is to stay in at least another year. In my opinion, I'm not going to implore you to stay in the commission this time. Instead, what I'm going to ask is that we stop having this conversation. Whatever decision you make, stick with that decision, because every time we come back to this, it's impacting the morale of the fire company. It's impacting not only our volunteers, but our paid staff. People are asking, what happens if? People are asking, will I have a job in a month or two? This is not appropriate. With regards to what Chief McCarthy said, where Kennett and Longwood are operating now closer than we ever have. This is true. And with regards to option B, in my opinion, any discussion that would be had with the Kennett Fire Company would be had with the regional fire departments. So Mayor Fedek, something else that you said back in 2021 with the outcome, the ends don't always justify the means. And whatever the end is here, the blow to the morale of the fire company and the loss of faith in the leadership of our borough is going to, that we live in and protect, will always remain. So that's what has happened over the last several years, where this keeps going on and on every single time. And just please keep that in mind with whatever decisions you make moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Any other public comment?
Rick Franks, I'm the Assistant Fire Chief at Kennett Fire Company. I just kind of want to echo a little bit what President McIntosh said executively, but more on an operational level as far as the regional department we formed. So I heard a couple things tonight about ego and how there's a lot of ego in the fire companies, and that's true. But in 2021, the fire companies or the Kennett Fire Company took it upon ourselves to do an internal review of our response, of our not only our response times, but the amount of actual volunteers and personnel we had showing up on calls. And it wasn't what we thought it was. It wasn't as good as we thought it should be, as good as what we thought was needed to protect the company or community. So we put our egos aside. We put that out publicly. That was presented at the commission at a public meeting. It was also presented at Kennet Township's meetings. It was portrayed in the newspapers. There was a lot of big hits to our ego, but we took it. And with that information, we founded we went to Chief McCarthy. We added them to all of our responses to make sure we had an adequate response. And from them, we continued to build what we now have as the regional department. Our company met as a membership. We all took a vote and we voted to form this regional department with Chief McCarthy being the regional fire chief. So we found that the best, safest, and best emergency response that we can provide the community, that we think the community needs. So to echo what Corey said, option B for us is not really an option. So the regional department is the way that we see the future, and that's the way that we're going to go. So the regional department being Pomar Lynn, Kennet, and Longwood Fire Company, with Chief McCarthy being the regional fire chief.
Thanks, Mr.
Thank you.
Frank. Any other public comment? Chief, you had your time already. Thanks.
You're not gonna let me talk?
We can talk afterwards.
Will anybody succeed me their time?
Gabby Ratliff, 324 East Linden Street.
Are we gonna get a copy of this report? From the borough, not off the website, but actually sent to us via email. Will that happen tomorrow?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, it'll be publicly available, and then we'll also send it to you.
Well, I would like to have at least a little bit of time before I have a conversation with Mr. Sheridan. I don't think anybody wants you to leave the commission, but I also don't think anybody's upset if you do anymore. I think there's been a lot of damage that needs to be repaired. And honestly, moving forward, I don't know how you're going to succeed with them. Matter of fact, it's not going to happen with you as the commissioner. And I think that you need to step down as the commissioner so we can have some productive conversations for this town. And if you don't want to step down, council, I think it's your job to find somebody that's actually going to put the time in and work with us collaboratively and transparently. That's not happening right now, and you're reaping the benefits of it. You need to understand a couple of things. Skilled labor ain't cheap, and cheap labor ain't skilled, right? This town deserves what it's getting. These people need to be safe. You're going to keep building things here without our involvement. And this is the problem that we've been discussing with Mr. Norris. And this also relays into some of the animosity that exists. You know, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Councilman Norris about plan review because we're not involved in it at all. And, you know, he was fortunate, I was fortunate, and I thank you for going back and asking the questions. Hey, why isn't the fire department involved in this process? And essentially, your codes officer said, well, you'll get the plans after we're done, so you know where things are. I said, the better part was that your public works director decided to take them down to the Kennet Fire Company and tell them, well, we're going to give them to you because I have to, but I'm not going to give them to the asshole up the street. And you guys wonder why I always seem like I'm aggressive with you. Right? You're building 500,000 square feet of apartment buildings. Not one single fire department. They're not going to call you at 3 o'clock in the morning to come solve the problem. They're calling us. You should be making this easy for us from the get-go. Right? We have certified fire inspectors on our staff. They're certified to do plan reviews. We know our equipment. We know the responses that are coming. All the other municipalities, they involve us in their planning process. Right? They take our feedback. Why? Because we're their service providers. We know what's going to have to take place here. You guys need to get your act together. It's completely, it's just irresponsible.
Somebody going to concede their time? Jamie? Jamie, one more minute.
Okay. This will be quick. So we heard a lot of emotion from people. No one's talking about the quality of the service. It's about the dollar value. It's about how much money it's increased over the period of time. And the study said we would save money. when we first signed up for this. It's significant. It's going to over double. So that's the question. And when that money is spent in this manner, that money is not available to help, as the gentleman said, cellular service. It's an allocation of resources that's going down one path. And is that the right path? And the way it's structured right now, it seems like we're not getting a good enough vote in the allocation of those resources. And that's why the study's being done. The temperature in the room needs to lower. We need to talk candidly about what the problem is and how to fix it.
Thank you, Mr. Mellon. Any other public comment?
LaToya Myers, 323 East Linden Street. There's been a couple of inaccuracies about why this commission was formed in the beginning. So I was sitting on council when that was happening. So I just want to speak to that a little bit. One of the things is when we commissioned this, when we studied and said, hey, something's out of control here, and we really need this public health infrastructure to be more stabilized, we said that we wanted to contain costs. We never said it was a cost-saving mechanism. And I think that that's misinformation that keeps circulating. And yes, those numbers are big, right? But we know that for public health initiatives, there's big numbers, right? And we knew that going into it. And so when we say contain costs, we've all in our personal lives experienced inflation. So to say that that's not the same thing that's happening with these public health initiatives, we're kidding ourselves. So I would want us to just step back, right? To say, yes, it's a lot of money, but how much more would it be? We saw some numbers about how much more would it be if we did not try to regionalize and to commit to that. We talk about transparency, right? We keep throwing that word out and throwing that word out, and we're saying this administrator will grant us transparency as a borough, right? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it is one of you being at the commission meetings and bringing it back to the borough, and that is a transparent. That's one option. So I employ each of you to think about the other options that you can bring transparency. Because when I hear about an administrator, I hear more costs. I don't hear less costs, right? And we keep talking about costs and costs and costs, and it's like, that's more costs. So if you're going to have a specific role that this administrator is going to have beyond just saying, look at budgets and transparency, because you all do that, right? What else is this person going to do? So how else could we get transparency without potentially adding a high level official to the mix? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers.
Good evening. Andy Froning, 308 Marshall Street. As a person and a family who's personally benefited from fire and EMS over the last 20 years, I strongly suggest that you take the time and effort to figure out how to make the commission work. If your estimates, I don't know what the margin of error is on your financial estimates because you didn't have all the financial information you needed. But even if they're half wrong, you're still better off at the commission. But take some time to figure out how to make the commission work equitably and transparently. Because as other people have said tonight, the regionalization in this time and age is the only way you'll succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Froning. Anything else from the public tonight? Thank you all for your comments, your questions, considerations. Anything else from council tonight?
A lot to think about.
There's a lot to think about. More discussion on Wednesday. With that, no further action. Meeting's adjourned.